Hello everyone, in this video I'll show you the new addition to the lightning generator, that is the volumetric lightning generator. It generates the lightning based on the volume of the input object, and you can use multiple objects. You can create the lightning inside as well as near to the surface of the input object. In this video I also show you how to create the lightning from scratch with these generators. So let's get started. So this is the volumetric lighting generator, and this is the default scene setup. It has two main settings, the mesh settings and the curve setting. The rest of the setting like lightning branch setting, effect lighting branch setting and branch geometry settings are same as the previous generators, and I'll explain later in this video. So let's focus on these two settings. In the mesh settings, you have to first input the collection that contain the objects to specify the volume. Then it generates a grid based on the domain size of the input mesh with this grid step, and this is the scale. So by default it generates the grid as the same scale as the domain size. However, you can create the grid beyond the domain size with this scale by increasing this scale value. And suppose your input object has plane, means object that has a zero volume, you can use this threshold to generate the lightning even on the object that has zero volume or like object plane. And these two settings are very important. So the first setting allow you to generate the grid only near to the surface of this mesh, and the second setting is allowed to generate the grid inside this object or in the volume of the input object. So right now it is using the volume setting, so lightning is inside this torus. However, if I off this and specify a small width to generate the grid near to the surface, see the lightning is near to the surface. You can also combine these two settings to generate the lightning. And because we have two settings, so there is a minimum distance. Let me move this object along the x-axis. See, there is no lightning in this torus because the distance between two objects is larger than the twice of this width. So keep that in mind. If you want to create the lightning across these objects, you have to either increase the width or bring the object close together to generate the lightning across them. Then you have this merge by distance setting, and it generates the lightning with the smooth structure. So by merging some of the points of the underlying grid. See, suppose you want to influence the lightning based on the attribute of input object. So this object has some kind of attribute like vertex weight or vertex color, and you want to influence the lightning. So first you have to specify that group here, and then you can enable these settings. Means limit the growth of the branch as well as you can affect the weight. So weight will decide where the lightning will form most likely. Means higher the weight, that region has more likelihood chance to form the lightning. And then you have curve settings. So curve object basically decide the from where the lightning will start and how it move through the mesh or across the mesh. Okay, so if these settings are disabled and we have only added this curve object, then the first point of the curve is used as the start point of the lightning, and it is not influencing any other factors of the lightning, and that can be enabled with these settings. If you enable this one, affect branch weight by curve, then it's going to change the lightning pattern. See, it is going like that. With this it is going like this. And you have other settings like single or multiple splines. Means if the curve has multiple splines, you can create an individual start instead of first spline start. And you can also generate the lightning at the end of this spline or the curve. Let me enable this one. See, so this branch is only formed when you enable this setting. See, it is disabled, now it is enabled. So this is really useful when you want to create some kind of a strike effect so on some object, and that's why I added this option here. Then you can basically specify the distance Falloff to affect the branch weight with these parameters. And then these three settings are common for all these three generators: the lightning branch settings and affect lighting branch setting and branch geometry. Now in brief I'll explain these settings. However, you can check out the documentation for details where in depth I have explained each of the settings and how do they affect the behavior of this lightning. So lightning branch setting is related to how many branches you want and their variations with the time, and you want to limit some of the branches based on the curve. All these settings are in this panel. So you can like decrease the number of branches, you can increase the number of branches here, and then you have like a branch time factor. This factor is basically control the variation of this lightning branches with time for the branch as well as for the main branch. Main branch is the main variations, the bigger variations of in the branch. And then you have this option to flow this lightning along the curve, and it will be really pronounced if you make this time factor 0, and if you enable this, it's going to flow the lightning along the curve. That I'll explain this in the curve lightning generator part. It will be more clear because it is in 2D. Then you have this like a noise scale, and you have this first and individual start. So like in this case, lightning start branching from the start point. However, probably you don't want that. You want the lightning should branch after a certain distance. That is possible with this option. So if I type 0.5, so start point of this curve has 0 value and end of this curve has 1 value. And I have typed 0.5, so the lightning branch will start near mid of this curve. See, it is single branch, then after that it becomes splitting into multiple branches. And then you have distance. You can limit the number of branches only near to this curve. See, so this setting is basically limiting the end point of the branches within this distance. Then you can subdivide the branch and increase the fine detail scale. So this setting is to affect the lightning with external objects. So we have the lightning, and suppose we want to interact with this lightning. You can do that with these settings, like you can repel the lightning with this object, or you can also attract that lightning with this object. This is really useful, like in the example of Thor, like lightning is attracted to the hammer, so you can attract that lightning to this object. And you can also trim the lightning with the closed mesh. Okay. In the repel case, you can define the Falloff and repel branch weight, means how much weight it's going to affect. And then in this case, you can also morph the lightning onto the attract object. See, it is only attracting that branch into the psychosphere. However, if you enable this morph, then it's going to morph the lightning onto the surface of this sphere. And in trim case, you can basically redefine the radius of these branches. And then you have these geometry settings, and geometry settings are basically related to the radius of these splines and start radius, end radius, and allow you to make the core of the branch by making the longest branch thick, like see. And you can also play with this threshold to create a multiple cores or multiple branch thicker, and then you can also make the end point branch thicker. Okay, you can do that as well. And here this is thickness parameter, and you can also remove this fall off on the longest branch or the end point branch. See, and that is also possible. And here this is parameter to basically trim on the lightning. This is the color of the lightning material, and you can also add the contact lights for the attract as well as trim objects to create hot spots. So let me bring this cube here, and if I enable this one, see, it creates the light near that trim point, so it will serve as a hot spot for the lightning. These are the settings that are common for all the generators, and these two settings are specific for this volume lightning generators. Now I'll explain how to generate the lightning from scratch with these generators. So let's first do that for the curve lightning generator. Let's open a new file. So if you download the zip file, lightning generators, Blender 3.4 and version 1.6, it contains these files: the curve lightning generator, surface lightning generator, and the volume lightning generator. This is the documentation, and this is the short video how to append or use them as an assets. If you want to use them as assets, just copy these blend files into your asset library, then they will appear in your asset browser. The another way is to directly append the lightning generator object or the collection into your project file. So we're going to append the collection into this file. First go to the file, then append option, and then navigate your this blend file, curve lightning generator. Double click on that, and you can append the object. This object, it's going to append the lightning and related collections to this file, but I'll recommend you should append this lightning setup collection instead of that object, and it will bring all the collections and object in a nice order. So let's append that. See, we have that collection, and it contains the lightning object collection, attract collection, repel collection, and trim collection. So let's hide these three, and let me go to this top view, and also I'm going to let's select the lightning, and let's change this to a properties so that you can see the settings of this generator. So we have this setting. Let me pin this. So we have this lightning. Let me also enable this bloom, and first I'm going to deselect this and also delete this curve, and I'm going to also hide this point object. So we don't have any lightning, but we have this curve lighting generator object with these default settings. So only thing we have to do is we have to input the curve object in this socket. So let's open this curve object and just move this object inside this socket, and it will generate the lightning with default settings for this curve object. So now you have the lightning for your curve object. You can make them 3D. Now suppose if your curve has multiple splines, and let me type here. See, we have these multiple splines. It's going to generate the lightning across these splines if the splines are within this radius. And if you enable this option, the single to multiple, then it will generate the lightning for each of these splines. Otherwise, it's going to use them as a single spline and then create the lightning. Okay, and this is the basically length step to sample that curve along the length, and this is radius step is sample step perpendicular to this curve. Delete these curves, and we have this one, and you can define the tapering of the light with these parameters along the curve. Okay, now this lighting is based on the curve. You can change the tilt to rotate this lightning about the curve, and you can also use the tilt factor to create a spiral lightning, and it is also available for this 3D case. And let me make this 0. Then these are the settings which I have already explained: lightning branch, affect the lightning branch, and geometry. And in this case you can affect these, attract these lightning, and repel them with the object, and you can trim them. And here let me show you this flow along the curve factor option. Let me disable first the time factor so that we can see this effect more clearly. So right now it is a stable lightning because we have make the time factor 0. Now let's first make this around 0.5, maybe in the wireframe. Let me increase this. See, it is flowing along this curve, so that is also possible. And on top of that you can add a small time factor to further add the variations onto the lightning. And here you can also change the parameters related to the geometry of the this lightning. And one thing I would like to show is that this spline endpoint feature, see, it is more clear in this case. We have this branch. Right now I'm using a make long branch thick option. You can disable that. You can enable this make splines endpoint branch thicker. See, you have this core, and you can also remove the Falloff. It is really high, maybe 0.1. Okay, so you can do that. Now let's make the lightning with the surface lighting generator. So first we're going to append that collection. Let's first navigate the file, this one, then go to the collection, select this collection, disable this option, instance object data, and then append that. So let's make some room here, and we're going to also change this to properties. Select the lightning, pin this option, and let me collapse all these collections, and let's enable the bloom. So in this case you have one more collection, that is a surface. Because it is surface lightning, so we have to define the surface for that. So let me deselect this one and also this one, and let's also delete this Bezier curve and also delete this plane. So first we're going to create our mesh object. So let's create a plane, and keep in mind that for this lightning your mesh should have a decent number of subdivisions, so that is important. Let me add black material to this, and let's add some subdivisions to this. Maybe this number is enough. Now let's put this collection, surface collection, into this socket. So we have nothing because we haven't defined our curve object. So let's create the curve object, something like this, and let's input that into this. So we have this, and let me disable the default settings. So this is the default settings. So we have this lightning onto this curve object. So first is merge by distance. Basically allow you to merge some of the points of this mesh to create a uniform grid for the surface lightning. And this option is also allowed to merge different objects together to create the lightning across multiple objects. Let me select this collection and add a new object, maybe a icosphere. Let's add a good number of subdivisions on this, and also add a black material to this. Let's move this to along this axis. See, it is not creating any lightning onto this sphere because our curve object is on this mesh. It's not on this mesh, and these meshes are not in contact with each other. However, if I move this mesh close to this plane, let me something like that, then this option, because merge these meshes together, that's why this is lightning across these two objects. Then you have this setting, this is the morph and offset lightning. Means if I off this, then you have lightning going through the surface that probably you don't want. You can enable this, and you can morph the lightning onto the mesh surface, and you can also define the offset. Okay, from the surface it's going to push that lightning along the normal of the surface. And then you can define the attribute. Suppose your input object has attribute and you want to influence the lightning based on that, you can specify that attribute and define these settings. Let me first delete this sphere, and let's add a vertex weight to this plane. So let's change this to render view, and let's change this to a weight paint. So now let's enable this setting, the grow branches in attribute and affect branch by the attribute. Let's add some weight to this plane. See, we have the lightning in this region, and maybe something like this, maybe like that. See, you have the lightning in the weight region only. Means only grow the branches that have endpoint in this region, and you can also affect the weight, so concentrate the lightning only this region. And on top of that, you can also use the curve object to affect the lightning, so you can combine these together. Okay, so right now we are using only the attribute option. We disable this. Let's test these settings. First is start single or multiple. Means if your curve has multiple splines, you can make a multiple start points. So if you want to generate the endpoint branch for this curve, you can do that. See, it is here, and you can affect the weight of this lightning with this curve and with this distance fall off and this weight value. And in the lightning branch, you can also limit the branches within a certain distance about this curve with this option. See, it is limited within this distance. And you can also use these objects to affect the lightning. Let me bring that here. So it is get attracted by the psychosphere, and you can repel that with this object, and with this object you can trim that. Let me check if it is in this plane. Yeah, see how you can trim on the lightning, and these are the same settings for this generator as well. Now let's generate the lightning with the volume lightning generator. So first we're going to append that. So let's go to the desktop, navigate the file, here it is, double click on that, then go to collection and select this collection and disable this option. So you have this default scene. Let me make some room here, change this to the properties, select the lightning and go to the modifier, and I'm going to pin that. So in this case you have the new collection is that the volume means that contain the mesh which is used to specify the volume, and you have the curve object. So let's start from scratch. Let me hide these collections, and also I'm going to hide this lamp, and let me delete these icospheres, and also I'm going to delete this curve. So we have a clean slate. Okay, let's first create the mesh object inside this collection to specify the volume. Let's create the icosphere, and I'm going to change this to a wireframe so that we can see the lightning. So we have nothing because we haven't specified our curve object. So let's select this and add the curve object, and let's input this curve to this. See, we have this lightning in this sphere based on this curve. So let's first disable these settings. So we have this lightning which is starting from the start point of this curve. It is inside this icosphere. Let me disable this fill inside volume option, and let's add some grid to the surface of this icosphere, maybe a 0.02. See, it is on the surface of this icosphere. You can influence that by a weight. Let's increase the number of subdivisions on this icosphere so that we have a nice distribution of weight. So let's apply a vertex weight to this icosphere. Go to the vertex weight mode. Let's add some weight to this. And this we are going to interpolate to the grid that is used to generate the lightning. Okay, and let's go to the object mode. Now let's enable this one. See, it is affected by the weight, and we can also affect the branch weight. So it is exactly following the pattern that we have made with the weight. Let me change this to a render mode, and this to a vertex weight paint mode. See, and it's also useful for this volume option. So branch is only going to form in that region. Let me change this to object mode. See, this region has higher weight, so branches are only concentrated on this region and this region, not the other region of this icosphere. And then you can use the curve object to affect the lightning branches. Let me disable this attribute based option. Let's enable this one. See, it is concentrated along this curve. Let me go to the top view. See, so you can create a different patterns by combining different meshes together and with this curve option. And here you can basically change the branches of these lightning, and you can affect them with the curve. See, maybe even closer to this curve, and you can attract them, repel them, and you can define the geometry of these branches. Along with these generators, I have also provided a documentation which provide a detailed and in-depth explanation for these settings. And these generators are available on the Blender market on my Gumroad page, and also available on my Patreon page. So from there you can download these generators. So thank you for watching. Until next time, happy noding. Bye.